NASCAR has announced a ton of major rule changes for the 2025 season that include changes in the damage vehicle policy and Helio Castroneves being officially locked in to the 2025 Daytona 500. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start by talking about the Phoenix Spring Xfinity Series race, as they have a new title sponsor for the event called GovX200. GovX, I'm not entirely sure what exactly they do, but this is the first time I believe GovX has sponsored a NASCAR Xfinity or NASCAR event in general. So cool to see a new sponsor coming in for 2025, and also pretty cool to see that they're going to be working pretty closely with the Phoenix Xfinity Series race for the 2025 NASCAR Xfinity season. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about McDonald's. As it was announced late Friday evening that McDonald's has ended its founding sponsorship of the Chicago Street Course after being there for 2 years, losing a premier sponsor for the event. Remember, McDonald's is very locally close to Chicago, as they're founded in Chicago, and they've had a big entitlement work with the Chicago Street Course over the course of the last couple of years. We all know there's a lot of rumors, speculation about the future of the Chicago Street Course may not be coming back in 2026, and losing a big founding sponsor of that is potentially a big reason for that. I think there's a really good chance and possibility that they're not going to be back at the Chicago Street Course in 2026. Therefore, I think that's a big reason this move is taking place in the first place. I think that McDonald's is still going to be of 20-11 in 2025. There are still questions about Dr. Pepper's future with the team, but I think it's disappointing to see that McDonald's won't be working with this team in 2025, but at the same token, same time, it's not surprising and shocking they're going to be out of the Chicago Street Course after being there for the last couple of years. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Amazon Prime. Now, if you've been basically watching TV and you've been watching a lot of advertisements for NASCAR, you probably saw on Amazon Prime during some of the games, and basically during, I think, the game that was taking place on Amazon Prime a couple nights ago, they're starting to put out a lot more ads as we get closer to the start of 2025. And also, there was an advertisement for Fox earlier tonight, multiple times, on the Daytona 500. Now, the broadcast lineup has not been officially announced yet for 2025 for Fox, but I think that it's good to see that Fox is finally starting to show some ads for the Daytona 500. But I feel like it's getting later and later every single year when we're starting to see advertisements for the next year in season. We haven't seen any advertisements for the Busch Clash at this point, which is going to be on main Fox in 3 weeks from now. They're just promoting for the Daytona 500, which we all kind of know Fox doesn't care as much. But I've seen more advertisements for Amazon Prime, which are going to be working closely with Chase Elliott and Hendrick Motorsports in 2025. But it's good at least they're advertising, but same token, same time, it's also wild that it's taken this long for Fox to finally do some advertisements for the Daytona 500. It's been crazy that Amazon's put more work into it than Fox, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about IndyCar once again. Now, if you were watching some of the NFL games that took place, and shout out to Adam Stern for putting this out on his Twitter as well, you probably saw the first official ad for IndyCar broadcast for 2025. I gotta say, the advertising and the promotion that Fox has done for the IndyCar coverage so far this year during the offseason is absolutely huge. Because remember, IndyCar will be joining Fox in 2025. And it seems like Fox is putting a major effort into their IndyCar coverage. They have not announced a broadcast booth also yet for 2025, but we're hearing that Will Buxton is the favorite to be the lead broadcaster for IndyCar's coverage on Fox in 2025. I gotta say, I really am kind of proud of Fox for once for putting an effort into it. The question is, will the broadcast be good? Because the NASCAR coverage, for example, that Fox has had has not been very good. But we've seen a lot of promotion during NFL games. We've seen promotion for events that have been taking place. And I think they did a really good job this time around. I just hope that with all this stuff and the love that Fox is getting for the IndyCar stuff, they put the effort into it and the coverage is good. Otherwise, people will get frustrated with the coverage like they've gotten frustrated with the NASCAR side of things on that front. I really hope that the coverage can be good for IndyCar when they do officially go over there in 2025. I'm glad to see that they're putting effort into it. I just hope it can continue in 2025, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Andy Cowell. As it was announced late Friday morning that Andy Cowell has assumed the role of CEO and team principal at Aston Martin, as Mike Crack, who has been the team principal with the team of Aston Martin, will become, I believe, the technical director for the team starting this year. Now, Andy Cowell does have a lot of experience with Aston Martin over the course of the last couple of years, and I think this is a pretty big hiring as Aston Martin is making some major changes for 2025. It's no secret that Aston Martin really struggled in 2024. They really didn't have a good year, and Fernando Alonso was clearly frustrated with the lack of performance of the team. So that's why they're making this change for 2025. And I do gotta say that making this change does make a lot of sense. I think Mike Crack was not the problem at the team. I think the big problem is clearly one of the drivers over that program, that being Lance Stroll. But since his dad, Lawrence Stroll, owns the program and runs the program, there's going to be nothing changing there. So until you can get rid of Lance Stroll at this point, you've got to go interior and find someone different to try to run the team. I really hope Andy Cowell can come in here and try to fix the program up just a little bit, but I'm not sure he's truly going to do that. We'll see what ends up happening on that front, and we'll see if Andy Cowell can do a really good job as the new team principal and CEO of the program in 2025. We'll see what happens on that front. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Toyota. As there was a report by motorsport.com Saturday morning that Toyota is working toward a full-scale return in Formula One. Basically, they began their technical alliance with Haas at the end of 2024, but Toyota is certainly very interested in coming back to Formula One. The last time Toyota, I think, was in Formula One was in the mid-2000s when they worked with multiple teams. I think they're working very close to Red Bull when Red Bull was starting up their stuff with Infiniti, I'm pretty sure. I think Infiniti was really close to Toyota back in the day, if I'm not mistaken. And now it seems like they're interested in fully going and working with Haas. We know that Haas has a contract with Ferrari for 2025. But if Toyota does find their way back into Formula One, especially now with them working very close with Haas for 2025 in a pretty big way, I would have to think that you're going to see the Haas team switch over to Toyota if they do end up joining. Now, obviously, a new manufacturer would have to be approved. Cadillac just got approved very recently for 2026, so the earliest we probably would get a new manufacturer in Formula One is something like 2027 or 2028, so it's going to be a couple years unless they can get approved a lot quicker. But I think also the association with AEO Komitsu, who is running the operation over Haas, which that team had a really big improvement in performance in 2024. We'll just have to wait and see what happens with Toyota's future. I think it's very likely that you're going to see this end up happening where they come back. I don't think it will happen in 25 or probably even, like I said, 2026 as well, but I think there's a great chance that they could get their way back into Formula One in the future. We'll see what happens and see if they do end up making the move to get back to Formula One. It's been a long time since they've been in Formula One. I think there's a good chance and opportunity that they could get back to Formula One much sooner than I think a lot of people realize. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about tire tests for 2025. As Bob Pockrass on Friday afternoon put out a bulletin in regards to what tracks will be having tire tests for the 2025 season. And according to Bob, here are the tracks that will have tire tests: Phoenix, Charlotte, Michigan, Iowa, Gateway, and Loudon. Phoenix has had multiple tire tests over the course of the last couple of years. They'll probably be testing some sort of softer tire to try to make the racing better at Phoenix. Same thing would probably be said for Iowa and Gateway is what I'm thinking, kind of like in that smaller intermediate range. Because the racing at Phoenix, Gateway, and Loudon, well, I think the racing hasn't been awful by any stretch of imagination. It hasn't been the greatest in the world. Now, the next-gen car, and I think some of the fundamental flaws the next-gen car has, probably causes some of those issues, but also the tracks themselves don't always provide the best and greatest racing, especially with Xfinity Series going back there in 2025. Same with the Truck Series going back to Loudon, which I think the Truck Series will be testing there. There's also an organizational test that is expected to take place at Rockingham, pretty sure, for the Xfinity and Truck Series, so expect that to be coming up very soon. But I think it's good at least we know what tracks will be doing tire tests in 2025. I would have to think we go to some of the bigger ovals. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a wet weather tire test, and there's some other changes that could be coming on that front too. We know they did, of course, not too long ago test wet weather tires at Homestead Miami Speedway very, very recently. So it is going to be kind of interesting to see what other tracks maybe down the road. So they could add new tracks for the tire test, but these currently at the moment are the tracks that will be hosting the tire test at this particular moment in time for 2025. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Prema. As it was announced on Friday that Prema is making a ton of major announcements for 2025. And they announced two pretty big hirings for the 2025 IndyCar season. It was announced that Romain Grosjean will be the reserve driver for Prema in 2025, while Ryan Briscoe will be the sporting advisor for the team in 2025. Let's begin by talking about Romain Grosjean. We do think that Romain Grosjean is going to be working with Lamborghini in IMSA in 2025 on pretty much a full-time basis, but we know he will not be back full-time with Juncos Hollinger Racing in 2025. They're not even going to be running a third car over there. It's a very interesting move, to say the least, to put him as a reserve driver. But Romain, well, I don't think Romain Grosjean set the world on fire in IndyCar. He is certainly not a bad driver by any stretch of imagination. Early in 2023, when he joined up with Andretti, he was super competitive with that team. In 22 and 23, showed a lot of promise and a lot of potential with that program for the few years he was over there. So him being the reserve driver, especially kind of being from the same country that Prema's from, does make a lot of sense. Ryan Briscoe being the sporting advisor is not something that I really expected on my bingo card. Ryan Briscoe being with the team is huge. Ryan Briscoe was very good in IndyCar back in the day, almost won some championships and won quite a few races with teams like Team Penske, and also drove for Schmidt-Peterson in the mid-2010s and had that very violent crash at Auto Club Speedway in one of the greatest IndyCar races of all time. I think him being over there and helping Prema in a pretty big way, I think is a really great decision for the team to have him over there in 2025. I think some very interesting moves, to say the least, in regards to what the team is doing when it comes to what moves they're making for 2025. And I think it's a very interesting look at what they're doing for 2025 in regards to their lineup on some of the other areas for the 2025 season. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Tom Brady. Now, if you looked at the IndyCar advertisements from earlier today, you probably noticed that Tom Brady was in the advertisements for 2025 IndyCar, which is a little weird considering the fact that Tom Brady at the time does not have anything kind of confirmed to being associated with IndyCar for 2025. That is until Tony Donahue, who is a pretty credible reporter in the IndyCar industry, most recently talked about this on his most recent episode on the podcast. It sounds like Chip Ganassi Racing may be fielding a fourth car in the Indianapolis 500 in 2025. It sounds like Jimmy Johnson may be the driver of that fourth car, as Jimmy Johnson is taking potential interest in running the Indianapolis 500 once again for 2025. And Tom Brady, who of course is going to be with Fox Sports and is, I think, good friends with Jimmy Johnson off the racetrack, I'm pretty sure. It sounds like those two are going to be working pretty closely in 2025 if this does end up coming true. I gotta say, Tom Brady's been getting involved in motorsports. We know he had some association with Formula One not too long ago. I'm not exactly quite sure if he still has ownership in the AlphaTauri or the Visa Cash App Racing Bull team. I think it's a team he was owning at one point, so he does have some experience being an owner. And I think it'd be cool for him to have some partnerships with Jimmy Johnson, right? And see Jimmy come back and run the Indy 500. Jimmy Johnson has not run the Indy 500, I believe, since 2023, I'm pretty sure, or 2022, excuse me. And he had some decent success with speed. He showed a lot of promise, but it just never really worked out. But I think him being the fourth Chip Ganassi car would make sense. He's had association with Ganassi the last couple of years when he did run an IndyCar. So I think it'd be pretty awesome to see Jimmy Johnson get the chance and opportunity to come back to IndyCar and race in the Indianapolis 500. I think there's a solid chance of something like this happening in 2025 where we could end up seeing him get the opportunity to get back to Indy 500. And Tom Brady being the guy working with Jimmy Johnson really closely would certainly be very, very interesting. So we'll see what happens in regards to this partnership for 2025, and we'll see if, in fact, Tom Brady and Jimmy Johnson do team up for the 2025 IndyCar year, and see if they do end up teaming up for the 2025 Indianapolis 500. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about sponsorship. Now, this is a story that kind of went under the radar over the weekend. But it's reported by Bozy Tatarevic, who works very closely with NASCAR and many teams in the motorsports industry, that it looks like Cup teams will have more space available in regards to sponsorship opportunities for 2025. And the big one that I noticed, and Breakar brought this up on his channel as well, is it looks like sponsorship is going to be available to be put on the window nets for the first time, I think, ever in the history of the NASCAR Cup Series. Now, I don't believe for the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series, this rule is going to be coming into effect. But we've been seeing a lot more sponsorship opportunities with the next-gen car especially be coming out. And now you've got the opportunity for window nets being used as potential sponsorship opportunities for like a small-scale sponsor. What I am hoping, though, is that we don't go completely overblow with this. One of the things I clearly worry about is some of these teams really want to use sponsorship and get the sponsors they have out there as quickly and safely as possible, and they want to save a little bit of money as well. And I do think that you don't want to overkill like the NASCAR Mexico Series does or some of the other series do in the world, where sponsorship is overkill and it's really difficult to recognize a car and it doesn't look the most aesthetically pleasing. It doesn't look really, really good, and it's not really good to the naked eye. I think having one small sponsor on there is like fine. I like some of the cars we have now, but I think it also will give more money to the teams too, which I think is a positive, and I think that's what we want, is the teams be able to have as much money as they can for the upcoming years, and they be able to have the money that they need to get through the season. So it's interesting to look at for sure, and it's an interesting move to say the NASCAR is kind of updating on that front in regards to potential sponsorship opportunities, but I think it's a good change overall in some areas, because I do think giving the teams more of an opportunity to find sponsorship opportunities for sponsorship is really good for the teams overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Alpha Prime Racing. Now, recently, Cesar Baccarella was talking to RJ Starvik in the last couple of days. And Cesar Baccarella revealed that Alpha Prime Racing, for the first time, we will have lease motors for ECR in 2025. The big reason why they're getting top-tier ECR engines is because Parker Retzlaff is joining the team full-time in 2025. And remember, Parker Retzlaff has very close ties with ECR. Now, a lot of people are really confused about this, especially what happened at Daytona International Speedway in 2023. Remember, Parker Retzlaff had pushed Harrison Burton to victory lane. Harrison got his first career NASCAR Cup Series win, and apparently Chevrolet and Rich Schultz Racing were very unhappy with Parker Retzlaff about that. But ECR is also an affiliation with Alpha Prime. They just haven't had the top engines. But they've got Parker coming to the team and the program. And it's good to see that they're going to be getting really good stuff for 2025. Alpha Prime Racing is a team that I've wanted to see be able to have a potential breakout season. And they've got two really young and hungry drivers. Brendan Poole's in his mid-30s, but he's a guy who was in top-tier equipment not many years ago and is with a team that's been growing. Alpha Prime Racing is a team that has been on the up and up. And you've got Parker Retzlaff, who at one point was rumored to go into a team like Spire, now, of course, joining up with Alpha Prime this year. I do think that him going over to Alpha Prime, he is going to have a really great opportunity here to do good things. And them getting ECR engines, I truly think, is going to help this team this year. And I look for this team to have their breakout season overall. I could see Brendan Poole being a borderline playoff contender, and I think finishing top 15 in the standings would be the goal. And I think Parker could honestly be a sleeper pick at one of these super speedway tracks. Parker's been pretty good at super speedways, and we know Alpha Prime has a pretty solid super speedway program as a whole. So I think him being over there and working with them is great as well. So I'm excited for this team, right? They're looking really solid. They've got a bright future as a whole. And I think bringing and getting a little more not sponsorship, but getting to help from ECR in a pretty big way is really great in my opinion. So I'm very excited about this, and nonetheless glad to see that they're going to be able to get big ECR engines for 2025. A pretty big win for the team at Alpha Prime Racing in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about WeatherTech. As it was announced a couple days ago on Friday that WeatherTech will sponsor Trackhouse at the Rolex 24 in 2 weeks from now. Remember, Trackhouse Racing is going to be fielding a car in this year's Rolex 24 at Daytona with TF Corsa in the number 91 machine. The four drivers are going to be Shane Van Gisbergen, Connor Zilisch, Scott McLaughlin, and Ben Keating. Connor Zilisch and Shane Van Gisbergen, who both will be driving part-time for Junior, well, one driving full-time for JRM, but also under the contract with Trackhouse. And, of course, you have Shane Van Gisbergen, who's going to be full-time with Trackhouse Racing in 2025. in the NASCAR Cup Series. Well, of course, Scott McLaughlin will be driving for Penske once again in 2025, though he is reportedly in a contract year with the team. And we also do know that Ben Keating is going to be doing double duty as he'll be running in multiple different classes in 2025. WeatherTech, very close to Trackhouse Racing, not shocking and surprising, especially with the fact that WeatherTech is working closely with Connor Zilisch and Shane Van Gisbergen in 2025. 36 races across the board this year in NASCAR competition. It really isn't shocking and surprising. I think this Trackhouse team has a really great chance and opportunity to go out there and win this year. I would not be surprised if you see them win in their class this year. I don't think they're going to win overall because they've got a lot of really good competition, and GTP is completely stacked for 2025. But like I said, I do believe truly in 2025 you're going to see this team have a fantastic shot and opportunity. And I think this is a huge win for the organization. They don't have to get sponsorship for the Rolex 24, though sponsorship doesn't cost as much for an event like the Rolex as it does for like the Daytona 500 or whatever. We still don't fully know what the Trackhouse sponsors are, even though there's a chance in the next day or so they may be announcing some sponsorship for 2025. Again, good to see that Trackhouse will have sponsorship with this team and program for the Rolex 24 in 2025 later this year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Junior Motorsports. As it was announced early Friday morning that Junior Motorsports has officially announced their crew chief lineup for 2025. First, Andrew Overstreet, as expected, will be the crew chief for the number 1 car for Junior Motorsports in 2025, meaning he will be the crew chief for Carson Quaffle. Next, Jim Pullman is back and working with Justin Allgaier in the number 17 in 2025. Next, Phil Bell, who finished the season with Sammy Smith in 2024, will be back working with Sammy Smith in 2025 in that number 8 car. Corey Shea will be the crew chief for the number 9 All-Star car that Shane Van Gisbergen and Ross Chastain are going to drive, and some other drivers that I would expect to get behind the wheel of that C. And finally, Marley Lindley, who was a crew chief for the number 1 car Junior Motorsports with Sam Mayer this past year, will be the crew chief for Connor Zilisch in the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025. Let's go through all the crew chief moves here, beginning with the Andrew Overstreet and Marley Lindley spot. This makes a lot of sense. Andrew Overstreet worked really closely with Carson Quaffle in 2024, and they got a few victories also. While, yes, Andrew did get a win with Connor Zilisch at the end of the season, Marty Lindley is a really good road course crew chief. He knows how to get it put down on road courses and short tracks as well. So I think all the crew chief moves make a lot of sense. And I think Phil Bell helps Sammy Smith a little bit near the end of the year. I don't know how much experience Corey Shea has as a crew chief, but I think he'll do solid doing good things with the number 9 team. It's not Kevin Walters, so that's good luck on that front. But I think that overall the crew chief lineup for Junior Motorsports is solid. I think the crew chief driver pairing that I'm most excited about is Marty Lindley and Connor Zilisch. I talked about that near the end of the year, but I really think that Connor and Marty are going to gel very well together in 2025. I think that's the most likely pairing to have a breakout year and just run really good. So we'll see how things end up working in regards to the crew chief lineup and see how they all end up doing together. But like I said, I truly think that JRM and Junior Motorsports' crew chief lineup is very solid and it's definitely very good for 2025. I really like the pairings that they've got set up for 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about charter money. Now, we're going to talk about updates on the lawsuit near the end portion of this episode, but it was reported by Bob Pockers on Friday afternoon after the dismissal came into play, or the announcement on that when it comes to charter money for 2025, Judge Kenneth Bell notes that the fixed amount of pool money will be approximately $5 million for every single charter in 2025. Now, the prize money on how much they make per race was not announced in it, though I would have to think they'll be getting a ton of that prize money as well. But this is kind of the same report we got. We expect the charter increase on every single one of these charters. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I heard it was like $2.5 to $3 million to even the lowest charter. The lowest charter is expected, minimum, to get $5 million, which means that the top charter team is probably making something around $25 to $30 million, which I think is a huge win for the teams as a whole. Now, the teams will get all that charter money most likely they get from the races, but NASCAR also does, in a sense, they control how much money the teams can truly make. But the goal of this charter system, we've kind of talked about as well, is for teams to be able to make as much money as possible. And the fact it's gone up to around $5 million, I think is absolutely huge. And I'd have to think as time continues on, especially with the charter system continuing to exist for the next 7 years at least, with a potential minimum extension coming after 2031, I think that's probably either going to double or even could triple for the lowest one. And we may down the road in the future see numbers in the triple digit figures with 9 figures perhaps. That could certainly be a possibility. We've seen that a lot, and I think there's a very good chance and possibility of something like this happening. Obviously, NASCAR, when it comes to the lawsuit and all that front, they're not the biggest fan of the charter system as a whole. But when I look at the fixed amount, that is a lot of money going to the teams, and $5 million is quite a bit of money, all things considered, but I'm not surprised to see that much when it comes to how much the teams are making, that even the lowest charter teams are making for 2025, like a Waiver Racing will be making this year. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Spire Motorsports and Rev Racing. As it was reported by TobyChristie.com and Joseph Sprigley, that Spire Motorsports and Rev Racing are expected to have ended their partnership starting in 2025, and they have elected to end their partnership in the NASCAR Truck Series for the 2025 season. Obviously, we kind of talked about this in the first video, but we all know that Rayon Brothers Racing will be expanding to a 3-truck operation in 2025, and the number they used was a number 2 truck. Now, I had heard a couple months ago this very much likely was going to be a possibility for 2025, where Rev Racing was basically just maybe going to be getting out of the truck series as a whole for 2025. It does sound like Rev Racing may still have association in NASCAR's top 3 series. I'm thinking they're going to be working closely with Nick Sanchez in 2025 in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. So I'm thinking, even though Gamebridge may not be part of that anymore at this point, even though they're kind of like an associate sponsor for the team, but I think that Rev will still be in NASCAR in some sort of capacity. Now, it's unknown and unclear what's going to happen to the owner's points for the number 2 truck. I have to think they may associate with Andre Perez-Laura, who is expected to drive the number 77 truck full-time for the team in 2025, according to reports. But it's kind of crazy to think that Rev Racing, that just got to the Craftsman Truck Series, 2 years ago, I'm pretty sure, starting in 2023, when KBM switched over to Chevrolet, and Rev decided to join up in the Truck Series just a few years ago. It's kind of wild to think that this team is getting out of the Truck Series potentially as a whole and not working in trucks after being there for just 2 seasons. In the 2 years they were in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2023, Nick Sanchez did not get a win, even though he probably should have won that Truck Series race at Texas Motor Speedway, but he showed a lot of promise and a ton of potential. And then in 2024 was a pretty big takeoff season. They had a really great year in 2024. Nick Sanchez made it to the round of 8 in 2024, and also, of course, got 2 victories at Daytona and, of course, at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and came very close to winning other races in the middle portion of the year, including at Talladega near the end of the season. I think that Spire and Rev's partnership had worked together very, very well. However, I think one of the reasons why this is mainly happening is because of the fact that I think that Spire, they want to have a 4-truck team in 2025. And I think that's a big reason, unfortunately, why this partnership that had been together for the last couple of years is sadly coming to a close and coming to an end. And I think that Rev, again, they're going to be fully focused on ARCA in 2025, but it seems like Spire may be buying up that ride as well. It seems like, I don't know what Rev Racing is currently doing, but the number 2 car sounds like, according to Chris Knight from Catchfence.com, it sounds like the number 2 car may only be a part-time entry in 2025, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on with Rev. There was a lawsuit, of course, with Cowell Motorsports not too long ago as well, which I think may also have a little bit of something to do with this a little bit, with them losing a little bit of money, and I'm sure Gamebridge may be leaving the team as a whole. We'll just have to kind of wait and see on that front. Still, a pretty big story nonetheless, that after being in the Truck Series for only 2 years at this point, it sounds like there's a lot of changes coming into play. Spire buying up the Rev Racing operation in the Truck Series, and maybe buying up their ARCA program as well, with, of course, Spire, like I said, expanding to ARCA in 2025, even though I think LeVar Scott will be back in the Truck Series in ARCA in 2025. We'll have to see what happens with the ARCA program, all this stuff for Rev. We'll have to see what the future of Rev Racing is for 2025 when it comes to the racing programs for the 2025 year and 2025 season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey LaJoie. Now, we've talked a lot about Corey LaJoie on the channel over the course of the last couple weeks because we all had thought that Corey LaJoie was going to be driving the number 51 car for Waiver Racing in 2025. However, that seems like it is not going to be the case for 2025. It sounds like Cody Ware is expected to drive the number 51 car full-time for Rick Ware in 2025, with an announcement probably coming very, very soon on that front. That means Corey LaJoie is not expected to have a full-time seat for 2025 at this moment. So what could Corey LaJoie be doing in 2025? Well, according to the NASCAR Rumor Nostalgia account, it sounds like Corey LaJoie may have a part-time ride in 2025, but also notes that there is a really good opportunity for Corey to be in a broadcast booth or be a driver analyst in 2025, and it sounds like Amazon might be the most likely landing spot where he ends up heading in 2025. I remember when Corey LaJoie did that podcast he did when it was announced he wouldn't be back with Spire Motorsports in 2025, and he had said he had media opportunities potentially for his podcast, but also could go to TV in 2025. But then we all thought he'd be going full-time with Rick Ware in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2025, but that is not going to be the case, unfortunately, for the upcoming season. Look, Corey LaJoie's 2024 year, it's kind of crazy to see Corey LaJoie's fall after being really not that bad in 2023. He was kind of this lovable underdog, kind of like the same situation Matt DiBenedetto was, only a lesser version of Matt DiBenedetto. And he had a lot of potential and showed some good stuff, would go fast and all that stuff. And then in 2024 hit, and Spire got a lot better, and their program showed a lot of improvement. Zane Smith and Carson Osbar both performed at a very high level, while Corey LaJoie really never took that major step forward. And then it was confirmed he wouldn't be back with the team, and it just seemed like that he got a lot of pressure on himself, that he made a ton of mistakes. He went from having no DNS in 2023 to falling off a cliff and just not running that great in 2024. But after he got fired from Spire and went to Rick Ware Racing at the end of the year, getting traded over there, I should say, for Justin Haley, driving number 7, he had some pretty good runs with Rick Ware. But I think that there's some stuff with Tommy Baldwin that happened behind the scenes that might have been a big reason why he's not full-time with this program, unfortunately, in 2025. As for maybe going to Amazon, that is certainly interesting. Corey does have a decent podcast, in my opinion. And of course, Corey's father was a TV announcer as well, that being Randy LaJoie. And Randy, I gotta say, was a very, very solid TV announcer and TV commentator. So it would make a lot of sense for him to get on the TV side of things. But I do think he will be in NASCAR in some sort of capacity in 2025. On the racing side, I think Corey does deserve at least a part-time opportunity. And I would think he deserves at least a decent opportunity in Xfinity or truck competition. But the problem is, at this point, a lot of those good opportunities and great seats are filling up very, very quickly, and a lot of the other full-time seats that are still not confirmed are probably going to get confirmed here in the next couple of weeks. And I do think some of those should be getting announced here very, very shortly. But I think about LaJoie's future at this point. I think it's very bleak at this point. He's probably one of the biggest free agents still not signed. And I don't think LaJoie's like a top-tier driver by any stretch of imagination. But I think that at the same time, he did go with Spire when they were starting up. But things have changed over at Spire. And that's why they made the move to go ahead and get rid of him in the middle portion of the year and put Justin Haley in the car. So they feel like Justin Haley has a lot more potential. I mean, there were rumors about Alex Bowman going to this seat. Obviously, that's not happening. But there was talk about Alex Bowman getting moved over to this seat while Justin Haley was going to go to the 48, despite the fact that Bowman had a pretty good resurgent season after missing quite a bit of the year with injuries and stuff the last couple of seasons. So I think that you look at the situation with LaJoie, I think he'll be with Amazon in some sort of capacity in the analyst role, but it's interesting he will not be full-time in NASCAR 2025, which isn't shocking and surprising considering we're very close to the start of the year and we're less than 3 weeks away from the Clash and only 34 days away from the 500. He had talked about running in the Daytona 500, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen at this point anymore either, in my honest opinion. We'll have to wait and see what LaJoie ends up truly doing in 2025, where he ends up going this upcoming season. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about 2311 Racing Front Row Motorsports versus the NASCAR Lawsuit. Now, We did a video covering this on the channel a couple days ago, on my birthday, by the way, a few days ago, but it was confirmed the judge has made his official decision after the teams in NASCAR went to court. You had NASCAR calling the teams in the RTA a cartel, quintessentially, and you had a lot of people that were very, very unhappy on both sides. You had the judge basically pretty much siding with them and saying that there was very unlikely that he was going to dismiss the case and they were going to go to trial. And it was confirmed on Friday that NASCAR's motion to dismiss the lawsuit overall was officially denied, and NASCAR's bond going against the teams was also denied. This is another major L for NASCAR, and NASCAR only has one really good opportunity here, which is to go for the appeal on the charters, which means if they don't win their appeal, this lawsuit is going to go through. And the judge, he pretty much said that NASCAR's arguments just really didn't hold up anymore, and basically they were running around in circles, which I completely agree. NASCAR, when it comes to their court findings and stuff, they basically were losing grip on the lawsuit. And I think this is definitely, without question, a pretty big win for the teams involved in 2311 and Front Row Motorsports, because the judge basically kind of went against them at this point. The prior lawyer in this lawsuit was pretty much pro NASCAR. Frank Winnie was pretty much pro NASCAR, was siding with NASCAR in a pretty big way, and he had the teams appealing. Well, then they changed the court, and they changed basically who was running the situation, and they brought Kenneth Bell in, and he seems more pro teams, which I don't think there's clearly anything wrong with that, but you also don't want a completely biased judge when it comes to the lawsuit. At this point, if you're in NASCAR's position when it comes to this lawsuit, you've got really not many options here. The only thing you're hoping at this point is that if you somehow win your appeal and they have to buy the charters back, and you get to buy the charters back at this point. If you don't win that appeal, and we don't even really know when this appeal date is going to take place, but it needs to happen very quickly if you're NASCAR's end, because we're 20 days away from the Clash, and we're only about 34 days away from the Daytona 500. So they need to get it figured out very, very quickly when the appeal is going to take place. Now, during the court case and when they were having the trials and all that stuff and some of the hearings, basically, the judge said that he has that set date for December 1st. That's the ultimate goal, is when he wants this lawsuit wrapped up, and nothing's going to change. Now, it could obviously get delayed. Things could definitely be changed for sure. There's no denying that, but I don't think the judge really wants to get to that point. He's hoping to have this lawsuit officially wrapped up in next year or so for 2026. And I think that, especially with the fact that the judge is pretty much denying some of NASCAR's motions going on at the moment right now, this tells me that we may have that 2011 and Front Row have a case. Their goal is to change the sport in a pretty big way when it comes to financial and all that other stuff. They want to get the sport in a much better position. And the reason they need that injunction that they got is so they could have their charters for 2025 for all their drivers like Tyler Reddick, Bubba Wallace, Noah Gragson, Riley Herbst, Zane Smith, and of course other drivers at the team like Todd Gillen. A lot of those guys had clauses in their contracts where they have to have charter cars. Reddick did. That's why there was at least some talk about Reddick maybe losing his seat. Now with the injunction being granted to the team, they're in a pretty good position. There's been back and forth and a lot of things that have continued to come out about this lawsuit. And again, I just think that at this particular moment, 2011 Front Row and the lawyer Jeffrey Kessler are all looking in a really good position, and they were very, very pleased by the decisions of the court to basically deny NASCAR's motion to dismiss it. The next big thing at this point for the lawsuit is going to be the appeal. If NASCAR loses the appeal, which I think it's pretty likely they're going to lose the appeal at this point, then at that particular moment, I think that you move on to the discovery phase. And again, it's going to be about 6-7 months, and this judge wants to get this case wrapped up very, very quickly. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the rest of this plays out as time goes on and progresses, but I do think 2011 and Front Row have a pretty big case here, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how this goes for the remainder of time. And we'll see what happens at 2011 Front Row in regards to the lawsuit. When we get more updates and information on the lawsuit, we'll discuss it here right on the channel. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about some NASCAR rules updates for 2025. Now on Friday, NASCAR announced a ton of major rule changes going into the 2025 season, and there were some pretty major ones that NASCAR officially confirmed. First, let's talk about the damaged vehicle policy, because this is a major one and probably the biggest positive change that NASCAR did announce. The damaged vehicle policy clock is pretty much gone at this point. NASCAR's old damaged vehicle policy rule is that if the clock expired after you got a ton of damage on your car, you could no longer continue racing and you had to take the car to the garage. Originally, when a DVP came out, if you had more crew members basically above the line, or 7 or 8 crew members, something like that, working on the car, your race would be over. They changed that, of course, and now you just get a 2-lap penalty. But then if you got a ton of damage and you took your car to the garage, originally, your race was officially over. That is no longer the case anymore. Now, there is technically a damaged vehicle policy clock for 7 minutes, but if you exceed that 7 minutes there, your race is not over. You get to continue working on it, you just go to the garage, but there's no limits in the garage, and you can return to the racetrack. Now, when it comes to flat tires, there's still issues with that. You will get towed to the garage, but your race isn't over. I do think that's one thing that I would love to see altered in regards to damaged vehicle policy, because especially with NASCAR's flaws of the next-gen car, I think they've absolutely got to work on that when it comes to it. I think that's a major thing that really does need to be fixed and worked on. But overall, damaged vehicle policy being changed, it desperately needed to be changed. There was major issues with it, and I'm glad to see the damaged vehicle policy is pretty much gone. And it's kind of like a balance of the old and the new in a sense, but it's pretty much, you don't have the situation of DVP clock. It was way too confusing. Drivers are frustrated and pissed off about all the things that were going on. I'm glad to see the damaged vehicle policy is pretty much gone at this point. It still exists a little bit, but glad to see they've gotten rid of that in a pretty big way. That's a big thumbs up for me overall. Let's now move on to playoff waiver changes, because there's been massive changes for the playoff waivers in 2025. Originally, you could pretty much get a playoff waiver for pretty much anything, except a couple things like missing a race for another thing, or just not having sponsorship to make a race. They gave out waivers like candy to guys like Ryan Newman and Matt Kenseth in 2020. Well, because of the situation with Kyle Larson in May, the playoff waivers have changed. If it is not a medical reason, whether it is someone giving birth in your family, whether it is you actually get an injury, or age requirements for like the truck series where you have to be 18 years old to run every track, if you don't get that, guess what? You still get to make the playoffs, but all the playoff points will be gone that you've earned, and basically the ones you get in the future, they also are no longer existing. This is basically a reaction to what happened with Kyle Larson. We had the waiver debate, and a lot of people were frustrated about it. Some saying Larson shouldn't have gotten a waiver, most being logical and saying he should have gotten a waiver. He did inevitably end up getting a waiver, but basically there was a lot of people in the higher-ups in the sport that were not very happy about Larson missing to run the Indianapolis 500. I gotta say, if there's one thing I would change a little bit with this, is the fact that I would be fine with the drivers in it missing for this kind of stuff, getting no points up to that point, removing all of that. But I think also I kind of understand NASCAR's logic. Now, the big thing in regards to this is the fact that suspensions also count as non-medical. So don't wreck somebody to win, or intentionally right-rear somebody like Bubba Wallace did to Kyle Larson, or Chase like did to Denny Hamlin down the straightaway. Just don't do that stuff and you'll be fine. So, because also going to clean up the racing a little bit better, and hopefully that will make the racing a little bit better on that front as well in 2025. I think overall it's a good change. I get why fans are frustrated, especially Hendrick Motorsports fans, about this change. But personally, I think it's a change that did need to be needed. And I think NASCAR really had no option or choice. But again, don't get suspended or don't miss a race to run the Indy 500, because Larson has said publicly he's going to be focused on running the running the Coke 600. Let's get to the open exemption provisional, because this has been another one that's been talked about quite a bit, and why I made the video on Friday. So NASCAR has added a new clause called the open exemption provisional. This guarantees a driver a spot in the field if they file this 90 days in advance. This is part of the new charter grant that has come into play. That means that Helio Castroneves, regardless if he makes it in on time or if he basically gets in on speed or whatever or not, he is guaranteed in. This could potentially lead to 41 cars making the field. Now, this open exemption policy, the driver and the team that files for this open exemption policy, they only get to do it. I don't think there's a limit on how many times you can do it, but you have 90 days to file it in advance. So Trackhouse knew about this 90 days ago. And also, you quintessentially only one driver can use it per race. You can't have two drivers like Helio Castroneves and Jimmie Johnson running it. Now, let's say Jimmie Johnson ends up failing to qualify. I think former drivers, including like Jimmie Johnson, like Mark Truex Jr., would not be eligible for this ruling. I think that there are definitely some positives with this. On one hand, it's going to give opportunities to drivers like Helio. Then they won't get money for it, but they'll be able to make the field automatically, and it won't discourage drivers like a Max Verstappen, like a Lewis Hamilton, like a Daniel Ricciardo, and like other drivers in that realm getting in. But I can also understand the negative in a pretty big way too, because you have someone getting locked in a big way, and I think it's taking a spot. So I think I understand that. But Helio Castroneves, because of this rule coming in, he's guaranteed in the 2025 Daytona 500. This is going to be the first Brazilian driver to make the Cup field, I believe, since I think Christian Fittipaldi back in 2002 or 2003, I'm pretty sure. And the first time Brazilian has raced in the 500 since Christian Fittipaldi. You're going to have 4 drivers from 4 different countries driving for the team. Rocha St. Champ, Gisberg, and Daniel Suarez, and of course Helio Castroneves. Continuing on, manufacturer penalties and when it comes to manipulation. They've updated the rulebook in regards to manipulation. They used to have the 100% rule in NASCAR. Now there's an update on that. The manipulation and manufacturer penalties come into play on that front as well. If NASCAR discovers anything the manufacturers are doing, whether it's with testing, whether it's all that kind of stuff, if they catch the teams doing something, there could be manufacturer points, wind tunnel testing going away, and I think NASCAR was planning to do something like this. Will they enforce it? Will manufacturers still kind of skirt around the rules? I think that is certainly possible for sure, without question. I think this manipulation thing is kind of just wait and see at this point what NASCAR is going to do and see if NASCAR truly does enforce it. I do think teams are still going to play in that gray area, definitely when it comes to that. Continuing on, let's talk about tech violations. Basically, back in the day, or about a year or so ago, there were technical violation penalties that really came into play, and they would go into effect immediately. If it's a technical violation, and it's basically like a tire falling off, you've got one race basically to kind of appeal. If you want to, you get one race deferral, but then the penalty will start going into effect the race after that. Finally, when it comes to appeals, if a team wants to appeal, instead of having 3 days to appeal, they've only got 2 business days to file appeals. We have seen so many appeals that NASCAR has, and sometimes teams wait 3 days to go ahead and file these appeals. NASCAR is trying to speed this process up quite a bit to not make it take so long to get it done. Overall, when it comes to a lot of the rule changes for 2025, I think there's definitely quite a few positives for the 2025 year in season, but I also think there's some pretty big negatives too. I get why fans are frustrated about the open extension clause. Also wondering about the playoffs. NASCAR did not announce any changes to the playoff format for 2025. However, they did say they could still make some changes, but we're not expecting any major changes yet for 2025. Overall, these rules are clearly interesting, and I think it's some interesting changes definitely for 2025 in regards to rules. So, that is going to be today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What are your thoughts about DVP being gone and Helio Castroneves being locked into the Daytona 500? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If there's any major news that does break later today on the channel, we'll discuss it live. If not, the next time you'll see me will probably be either a NASCAR news video at this point, or maybe a look at the Xfinity Series lineup. We'll just have to wait and see. There's a lot of great content dropping this week. We've got some news, I think, coming out for some teams this week, especially as we're only about 3 weeks away from the Clash. We should have a Clash entry list video coming soon. There's going to be an updated Daytona 500 entry list coming in the next couple weeks. We'll be talking about people like Haley Dean, Connor Zillage, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Bubba Wallace, Chandler Smith, Eric Almirola, Sam Mayer, Sheldon Creed, Kyle Busch, Kyle Larson, Alex Bowman, William Byron, Brad Keselowski, you name it. Cars Qualify, all this stuff should be coming really, really soon. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.